and you're watching Dukascopy TV. Well, Ben Bernanke recently reiterated the significance of the looming fiscal cliff. He said a fiscal shock of that size would send the economy toppling back into recession. Today I'm joined on the line by Nathan Janzen, an economist at Royal Bank of Canada, to discuss this in further detail. So Nathan, do you think the fiscal cliff will happen, and are you concerned about the implications that this will have on the US economy?
Yeah, I mean the size of that fiscal contraction that's baked into current law, so all those scheduled tax increases and spending cuts is pretty big. It's about CBO is estimated at about 5% of annual GDP in 2013. So that would be a pretty substantial fiscal contraction, and we like Mr. Bernanke, we'd be concerned that the U.S. could slip into another recession if it happened. But with that said, we don't think it's very likely that the whole fiscal contraction will actually hit. I think it's a lot more likely that they will get at least a partial deal done. Some of it we do think will occur. We think there will probably be some increased revenue from upper income households, whether that's from the upper income Bush income tax cut expiring, or whether they find there's some other way to get that revenue. But it's just for a lot of the larger stuff like middle income tax cuts, the upper income tax cuts as well, the payroll tax cuts that were in place over the last 2 years. We think there's broad agreement that those will expire. So some measures will hit, and we expect there to be some still significant fiscal contraction to occur. It's just some of those larger measures we think will be avoided.
Nathan, do you think the measures will have an impact on low-income families and the unemployment rate?
Given how broadly based the spending cuts and tax increases are, I don't think any demographic will be immune. So there's some expiring tax measures. A reduced child credit, for example, that would disproportionately impact low-income individuals as well. Low-income individuals or families also tend to be more vulnerable to a weaker economic backdrop. So, to the extent that additional weakness in the U.S. economy caused by the fiscal cliff alone would have a disproportionate impact on low-income families. In terms of the unemployment rate for the U.S., if we're getting about a 1 percentage point hit to GDP growth from fiscal contraction, which is what we sort of assumed in our baseline forecast, that would translate into about a half a percentage point impact on the unemployment rate. So our baseline forecast is for the unemployment rate to end next year at around 7.9%. So about where it is right now. With no fiscal contraction, we would think it would be more like 7.4%, so about a half a percentage point lower than that.
Over the last few years, government debt to GDP has been constantly on the rise. It's currently 1.03% of the country's GDP. Nathan, do you have a forecast for this figure for 2013?
Well, we don't have. We don't have a specific forecast, but if you look at the CBO's projections, which assume the full impact of that fiscal cliff, they have that ratio moving up to about 107 in 2013. So that debt to GDP ratio that I think you mentioned. So we would have. We're assuming about half that fiscal cliff gets avoided. So we probably have about half the increase in the debt to GDP ratio. So to something like 105, but it's obviously we still would see that number going higher next year.
And finally, government budget is minus 8%. How do you think the fiscal measures will influence this figure next year?
If you assume the full impact, so if the full fiscal cliff occurred, it would reduce the deficit by about close to 3.5 percentage points as a share of GDP. So we'd be looking at something like probably about half of that. So we would have the deficit falling by about say 1.5 percentage points in 2013.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for sharing your expertise on the fiscal cliff. It will be very interesting to see how the US economy will be performing in the new year. Tomorrow I'll be conducting the weekly wrap-up, reviewing some major economic events which have rocked the markets this week, so make sure you tune in for that. But for now, enjoy the rest of your evening.